Death, flames, snakes, the Crucible, the past, and Miquella. With all of these terms, I've summed up every major thing we saw within the gameplay trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree. A trailer showing us so much and yet at the same time so little. While I'm certain as to what we are going to explore in the DLC expansion, I'm also at the same time at a loss of what to expect from the lore of Shadow of the Erdtree. For one, the trailer has confirmed to us that Miquella is still alive and currently residing in the Shadowlands. But what exactly are the Shadowlands? And if he is there, has he already died? Why do we find a Shadow Tree here? An Erdtree antithesis? Where are we being transported to when touching Miquella's arm? Who is Messmer? And more importantly, what is his relationship to his mother Marika? Questions I try my best to answer in this analysis of the trailer. The first order of business, however, is from where and how we will enter the Shadowlands, the expansion area of the DLC. Since the first few seconds of the trailer focus heavily on Miquella's core, it is most likely from here where we are going to get transported into the Shadowlands. With Miquella actually confirming this in his own voice, we hear for the very first time at the end of the trailer. He says,
"Come now, touch the withered arm and travel to the realm of shadow."
The withered arm he is referring to is most likely the one hanging out from his core in Mogrim Palace, which at the very same time also tells us that Shadow of the Erdtree is to be intended for late game builds. As such, we are only meant to reach the map of the expansion when our character is around level 150, because with that level we should have no issue to beat Mohg, the gatekeeper of the DLC. Speaking of Mohg, if you've watched mine or another lore video covering the Mogrim dynasty, then you know that Mohg infused Miquella's core with blood in an attempt to commune with Miquella. Yet Miquella never talked to Mohg, who is his brother. But he is willing to speak to us, a stranger. It is very likely that when inspecting the core, Miquella will reach out and utter these lines of dialogue to us we have just looked at. And I'm sure about the reason as to why that is. It's because we have something Mohg never had that automatically makes Miquella trust us. That's something being Torrent, who previously belonged to Miquella, as we know now for over a year through this teaser concept art. As well as the fact that Miquella, who is a skilled craftsman, created the whistle to summon Torrent in the first place. With him sensing Torrent's presence and Torrent trusting us, it is as such the reason, I believe, that Miquella reaches out to us in the first place. And with us possessing Torrent, I believe it is what marks us as the promised lord Miquella is waiting for, and ultimately another reason why he is talking to us. Because we learn more about the DLC lore from Bandai Namco, who states the following about the DLC's lore on their website. The Land of Shadow, a place obscured by the Erdtree, where the goddess Marika first set foot, a land perched in an unsung battle, set ablaze by Messmer's flame. It was to this land that Miquella departed, divesting himself of his flesh, his strength, his lineage, of all things golden. And now Miquella awaits the return of his promised lord. With Torrent choosing us as his companion, it is most likely the sign Miquella has waited for to reveal himself to others. And with us filling the role of Miquella's lord, it is all but confirmed that we are getting a new ending added to the total of 6 ones already in the game, which might be the abundance ending many have already speculated about. After all, Miquella is related to the concept of abundance throughout his lore and actions we already have in the base game. But I wouldn't be too sure about the new ending being an age of abundance. For we have to ask ourselves what exactly Miquella is doing in the Shadowlands, which is a topic we could speculate about for hours and we still wouldn't come to a satisfying conclusion. We get confirmation that Miquella has divested himself of his flesh, his strength, his lineage, of all things golden. But as to why he would sacrifice so much to potentially exist for all eternity in the Shadowlands will remain a mystery until the release of the DLC on the 21st of June this year. I'm glad that the trailer has actually shown Miquella to us at the end, and that the trailer paints an even clearer picture of Miquella for us, which proves one of my older videos to be right after all. The first lines we hear at the beginning of the trailer describe Miquella in the following way.
Pure and radiant, he wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There is nothing more terrifying.
The terminology pure and radiant plus shrive clean the hearts of men are words that also describe Miquella's inspiration, Griffith from Berserk, perfectly. It marks Miquella's nature to be of a charismatic, kind and compassionate person who, instead of judging people in an ignorant or malevolent way, he looks at the good each person possesses and shows them the love and kindness as such, even if no one else does. At one point in the trailer, someone is referring to him as kind Miquella. kind in this context being a title describing Miquella perfectly when you think about it. After all, he built a Erdtree as a refugee for the shunned inhabitants of the lands between, invested vast amounts of time into the study of Golden Order fundamentalism with the goal of finding a cure for Malenia, and even built her prosthetic limbs that allowed her to move her body and also fight with it, even as the Scarlet Ward claimed more and more of her body. Miquella is in a sense similar to a priest listening to the confessions of people visiting a church, helping them with their problems and absolving them of their sins in a metaphorical way. Which is maybe exactly what FromSoftware wants us to believe about Miquella, since the expression "shrive clean" is used in exactly such a setting. In fact, it is yet another similarity to Griffith, next to the dozen I have already covered in this video, that cements even more my claim of these two characters being identical. And also why Miquella can invoke terror, as the letter sentence states, because as Malcolm X once said, "He who wins the hearts of the people secures the throne." Something both Miquella and Griffith have used to build their respective kingdoms. There's nothing more terrifying than a person garnering the affections of literally anyone else around them and putting themselves as such in the position of everyone doing their bidding. Plus, let's be real, who exactly is resentful towards a priest doing good in their community? Such a priest has definitely much sway over the community due to his likability. Furthermore, the bit about Miquella divesting himself of literally anything is another act similar to Griffith during the eclipse, sacrificing his soldiers and letting godlike entities transform his body in the process. As a result, I'm 100% certain that Griffith was used as the template for Miquella's character after this trailer. You should probably watch my video about this topic to see where I'm coming from. Also, another aspect of Miquella's lore the trailer has confirmed is that Miquella was never affected by Moke and the Formless Mother, due to them just having his corpse and not his soul. For at the very end, we see the silhouette and hand of Miquella in what seems like him purifying the shadow version of the Erdtree. Look closely at this frame and particularly the upper branches of the tree. You can see them being white instead of the dark black they are throughout the entire rest of the trailer. Since we see Miquella shortly before this scene, and with him being described as radiant and his body definitely looking radiant here, it is all but certain that Miquella has something to do with this cleansing of the tree. It might even be his goal and the reason as to why he came to the Shadowlands, which answers one but raises several other questions at the same time. But enough about Miquella, let's take a look at the lands of this expansion. For after Miquella's Core, we can see our tarnished on torrent riding through the Shadowlands, giving us a glimpse as to how big this area will be, and it is confirmed by Miyazaki that this land will be taller than Limgrave. You have heard myself use the term Shadowlands several times now, without me giving you my reasoning as to why I refer to this area as the Shadowlands. Well, it is actually Miquella who is telling us the name of the area we will explore in Shadow of the Erdtree. For his dialogue at the end of the trailer speaks of what we are going to enter as the Realm of Shadow, which I in turn will phrase into Shadowlands, since the areas we have seen throughout the trailer weirdly enough gave me the feeling of being the exact areas we have explored in the lands between, but a more twisted and alternate dimensional version of them with a strong connection to death. For what we prominently see here is an antithesis to the lands between and the Golden Order. Instead of light and life, these lands are shrouded in death and darkness. On the fields we traverse with Torrent, we can see a plethora of these spectre gravestones we know from the image teaser. Gravestones are naturally symbolic of death and might be linked to these enemies with a black hue covering their bodies. The design of these entities is crafted to evoke a sense of connection to death, positioning them, I believe, as the direct antithesis of the spirits we encounter in the base game. This connection to death may stem from their association with the Black Erdtree located within the Shadowlands. I've chosen to refer to it as the Shadow Tree, owing to its dark appearance and its role in casting shadows across the Shadowlands. These veils are a deliberate design choice FromSoftware added to help us grasp that it is not life but rather death and the spirits of the deceased that thrive in this realm, and that this realm is the polar opposite of the lands between. This would explain the presence of black enemy spirits in the Shadowlands, mirroring how spirits exist and are reincarnated in the lands between through the Erdtree and Erdtree burial rites. Speaking of these veils, these exact veils can also be found in Marika's bedchamber, which I believe is FromSoftware telling us in yet another roundabout way that Marika was in these Shadowlands at one point in time, as it is also stated in the marketing material, the Land of Shadow, a place obscured by the Erdtree where the goddess Marika first set foot. But when and why she came to these lands, we'll have to wait until the expansion's release. So yeah, all of these shadowy and death symbols boil down to these Shadowlands being most likely the realm of the dead, as it is actually through a symbolic form of death we and also Miquella entered these lands, or rather dream into. As you can read up in psychology, sleep is often considered a symbolic form of death and reawakening, due to its nature as a state of unconsciousness that temporarily suspends our active engagement with the world, mirroring the finality and detachment of death. Upon waking, the return to consciousness symbolizes rebirth or resurrection, offering a fresh start or new perspective, akin to a cycle of death and rebirth. And the same is definitely the case in Elden Ring and how we will enter the Shadowlands, which can be attributed to Miquella's alter ego known as Saint Trina, who represents dreams in Elden Ring's lore. In the trailer, the scene where we are lying in an area clearly associated with Saint Trina, evidenced by the presence of Saint Trina's lilies, suggests that the symbolic meaning of dreams simulating death in psychology will be used to enter the DLC. It is very likely that through sleep, which symbolizes dying and awakening, we transition into the Shadowlands, and at first find ourselves in possibly a pocket dimension of the Shadowlands, the realm of Saint Trina. So, it's clear that death, in multiple facets, will be a central theme for Shadow of the Erdtree. And the relation of the Shadowlands to death is also the explanation as to why we see in the trailer so much iconography to past aspects of the Lands Between's history. When I first caught a glimpse of the first boss monster in the trailer, I honestly thought I was looking at the Wash for a moment. But no, this creature is something else. It has omen horns protruding around its face and from its body, with its face being that of a lion, whilst having multiple humanoid bodies with arms and legs layered atop of one another. Whether they're grafted on or not, I can't really tell. But what I can say is that this boss embodies many different aspects of life, which makes me think it's got something to do with the era of the Crucible, who can not only use its fangs, limbs and breath to attack us, but also lightning. And another monster with a connection to the Crucible is this one. This massive monster bearing down on us, mouth gaping wide like it's about to swallow us whole. But then, in the very next scene, the same beast is unleashing an incantation with the very same sound and particle effect of all the other incantations linked to the Crucible. And we can actually use the exact same incantation that monster is using later on, as we can see in this image. Plus another nod to the Crucible is this knight on the back of what looks like a boar, wielding a lance infused with the purple hue of gravity magic. A knight riding a boar is, from my point of view again, something that must have been commonplace in the time of the Crucible. This era presumably witnessed the birth of the knightly concept emphasized by the Crucible Knights, who harnessed the power of creatures and beasts in diverse ways. Given this, it's plausible to imagine that during Godfrey's time, some knights preferred to ride beasts into battle over horses. However, the Crucible isn't the only past aspect we can find in the trailer. We've got this duel between two warriors, set against the stunning landscape full of beautiful blue flowers. One of the fighters is a samurai starter class our Tarnish can pick at the beginning of the game. Then, there's this woman in a striking red dress wielding two curved swords. I have no clue who she is, but take a close look at her moves. Her moves and attacks look very much like the blind swordsman depicted by the blue dancer talisman, especially with the way her outfit and sword swings seemingly flow like water. But unlike the dancer, she doesn't cover her eyes, so she's probably not blind and her outfit isn't blue but red. I believe she's linked to Malenia's mentor in some form. Or perhaps she got inspired by his legend and tries to imitate him. Or she was the mentor to Malenia's own mentor for all we not know. It's quite peculiar, but it seems unlikely that FromSoftware would allocate significant screen time to a character bearing a resemblance to a historical figure from Lands Between without a deliberate intent. Let me know in the comments about your ideas as to who this mysterious woman is. However, the nods to historical events extend beyond the Red Dancer, continuing with this ancient-looking warrior or knight. His armor, particularly the legwear, bears a resemblance to a Roman armor. His appearance has the initial clue that led me to the theory of the Shadowlands being a melting pot of deceased entities from various eras of the Lands Between, who have died and found themselves somehow here, which is, after all, a spirit world as we have looked at previously. And then there's also these lines.
In that forsaken place, blood must spill. Blood of your fellows. The Erdtree faithful.
To me, it suggests that the Shadowlands are deeply entangled in a significant conflict with the Golden Order. This faction has been involved in numerous wars throughout the history of the Lands Between, serving as yet another reference to the recurring theme of the past. That is again backed up by this scene here, where we enter an area eerily similar to the entrance of the Academy of Rhea Lucaria. I tried to replicate this exact shot in the Academy and it does look very similar. This could be a hint that the Shadowlands are just another dimension layered over the Lands Between. Or a distorted version of the past, built from the consciousness of all the dead with different perspectives of the Lands Between, which gave the Shadowlands their form. Also, there's someone sitting on a throne, but does anyone guess who they are? The place is bathed in this bluish purple light, which makes me think of Saint Trina, so he might be affiliated with her. Because with the next frame, we get a close look at that person's face, but more interesting is the attire, particularly the headpiece of the person. The design of his headpiece bears a resemblance to the finger maiden fillet, yet its distinct, more golden shape, coupled with his purple robes, suggests he might be a religious follower of Saint Trina, since gold, especially unalloyed gold, is associated with Miquella and purple with Saint Trina. Though this is just a short tangent, which is unrelated to the deeper thematic iconography connected to the historical past of the Lands Between. Therefore, I believe that the Shadowlands' association with death and its inhabitants' strong ties to the past suggests that the lore surrounding the history of the Lands Between and its deceased will be a focal point of exploration in the Shadow of the Erdtree Expansion. This connection could also be related to the Halfin and the existence of a spirit world introduced in the base game through the Halfin's Depot. A significant element of this is the association of the Halfin with the color red, notably their lamplight, which guides the spirits of the dead to the spirit world and us, who have died in battle, on our journey to the mountaintops of the giant. This connection between the color red and the deceased of the Shadowlands is also highlighted through the trailer and marketing materials' prominent figure, Messmer the Impaler, who is next to Miquella the most interesting person we have seen. Messmer has the title of the Impaler, which is an interesting choice. Not only is it probably a reference to Vlad the Impaler, the namesake of the vampire Dracula, but we actually have a place in the base game with exactly this title. Located in the Weeping Peninsula is the Impaler's Catacombs, which wouldn't be too far of a fetch to link to a newly introduced character bearing the title of the Impaler. I've already checked out this catacomb, but couldn't find even a hint linking this catacomb to Messmer. However, regarding the actions that might have led to Messmer being dubbed the Impaler, I think I have a very solid idea I will tell you in just a bit. Before that, we first have to talk about his dialogue. His first dialogue in the trailer:
Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light?
Poses an intriguing question as to who his mother is. The reference to mother in this context is particularly compelling when considering that a statue of Meroka is present in the background. To be fair, it is quite difficult to make out in the trailer itself, but from the images from Bandai Namco's website, we can get a clearer view at the statue behind him, which is almost identical to the statues we find of Meroka throughout the Lands Between, yet with the key difference of holding a baby in her arms instead of her cross-like pose. As for why this statue depicts Meroka as a mother is most certainly a nod from FromSoftware, trying to tell us that Messmer is indeed the son of Meroka. Further evidence for his connection to Meroka being that it is explicitly stated in the Miyazaki interview he had with Famitsu about Shadow of the Erdtree. Furthermore, the throne depicted in the DLC's concept art, which bears a striking resemblance to those found at the base of the Erdtree in Leyndell, not only solidifies his status as a demigod, but also strongly suggests he is the ruler of the Shadowlands. But more intriguing is the question of why he is isolated from his siblings in the Lands Between. My theory is that it has to do with an act Messmer committed in the past that invoked the ire of his mother Meroka. In fact, I would even go so far as to say that through this act, Messmer is possibly the unborn child of Meroka we learn about from this spirit, who can also be found in the Weeping Peninsula like the Impaler's Catacombs. An idea which is reinforced by his attire, being adorned with flame and snake iconography, including red serpents with wings encircling his body. This specific imagery depicts all of the enemies of the Erdtree followers. But why exactly are snakes considered traitors to the Erdtree? This is purely my speculation, but with Messmer being the child of Meroka and with him having snakes around his body, it might have been his act of betrayal towards Meroka and the Golden Order that forever connects snakes with betrayal in the eyes of the Erdtree followers. Though what betrayal, you might ask? It might have been an act of rebellion from Messmer against his mother Meroka, caused by what Meroka herself told her demigod children.
Hear me, demigods. My children, beloved, make of thyselves that which ye desire. Be it a lord, be it a god, but should ye fail to become aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices.
And truth be told, there is no better way to become a god by killing the currently acting god of the Order ruling the entire land. Impaling this god, his own mother mind you, with a red spear and forever being remembered by the title of the Impaler. An act of rebellion and high treason Messmer might have done against his mother Meroka. And due to his attire and powers being snakes and fire, they as of that moment became the symbols of treason to Erdtree followers. Additionally, the cadence of his statement,
Mother,
wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light?
Carries a tone of perplexity and disappointment. I assume this is because instead of him ascending to godhood by birthright, it is us whom Marika selects to sit upon the Elden Throne in Lanedown. My theory would explain the bit about referring to the Shadowlands as a land purged in an unsung battle, set ablaze by Messmer's flame. Maybe he betrayed and impaled his mother here, which forced her to leave the Shadowlands to not die to her son. And to further prevent him from gaining more power to wield against her, Marika might have sealed away destined death to weaken Messmer's powers and to stop her rebellious son. Although I am aware of the fact that destined death is associated with the Gloam-Eyed Queen and her Godskin apostles, I want to point out that their flames are black and white instead of the black and red flame motif we see when the Rune of Death is unleashed. And we know through his dialogue that Messmer's flame has some kind of connection to death. Also, there's additionally the ghost flame used by the Deathbirds, which is another flame related to death. What I'm trying to say here is that Messmer's flame could be another kind of flame related to death and deriving its powers from destined death, as there's already precedence for different flames being related to death in the game. For he himself actually implies that his fire is related to death through this dialogue.
Stripped of the grace of gold, shadow meet death in the embrace of Messmer's flame.
Further deepening the mystery surrounding his character, since the color of his flame does resemble the flames we see connected with destined death. This statement and my comparison not only highlight a strong connection to death and the red flame, indicative of destined death, but it could additionally also be connected with the Halfling's role in guiding souls to the spirit world. And the way he utters these lines,
Stripped of the grace of gold, shadow meet death in the embrace of Messmer's flame,
gives me the impression of a man fulfilling a duty given to him, a duty with strong ties to death. So maybe he was at one point on good terms with Marika and the Golden Order, that he was in charge of overseeing death in the lands between, as it maybe was his role in the Order before his treacherous act. For this would be the first instance of one of Marika's children being tasked with a duty related to fire. While it is forbidden under the teachings of the Golden Order, Marika's children are capable of wielding flames, as is the case with Melina, who not only uses the flame of the Giant's Forge to burn the Erdtree, but has, like Messmer, her left eye closed. And like Malenia or any other child of Radagon, Messmer has the same red hair like these characters, further strengthening his connection to Marika, but this time to her Radagon side, who could be his father as such. Considering all of these elements, I'm certain that Messmer is indeed the unwanted child of Marika, making him a demigod who is the potential ruler of the Shadowlands, as is the case of him residing on a throne which looks very much like the Elden Throne. Next to his line of Messmer's flame bringing death to those stripped of grace, which, considering his status as demigod, marks him as potentially one of the strongest entities within the Shadowlands. Though as to what his purpose is in the Shadowlands and what factors surround the potential betrayal of his own mother can be only answered via the upcoming lore with the release of the expansion. Which is also all of the significant bits of lore we can learn from the trailer. Other cool things not lore related are some of the new weapons, like this pair of double short swords with an extremely cool moveset. Also, the martial arts from Dark Souls 2 are making a comeback, which is probably the coolest thing I've seen so far. This single-handedly alone will make fist builds way more cooler and hopefully more viable. Can't wait to check this out. We also get a glimpse of a new incantation swirling with butterflies that have a purple hue similar to sleep effects like Saint Trina's torch. This might be a nod to the religion of Saint Trina being strong in the Shadowlands, and as such during our exploration of these lands, we will find incantations related to her. And there's also a knight decked out in complete black armor, shooting an automatic crossbow, which totally doesn't scream guts from Berserk. But the biggest new addition is definitely us using the wings incantation of the Crucible Knights. So glad they included this incantation finally in the game, which will look awesome with probably my most favorite new armor being this crow-feathered attire. The equipment gives off major Eileen the Crow vibes, and I'm all here for it. So yeah, these are my thoughts about what we have seen in the trailer. Let me know in the comments whether you in particular agree with my theory about Messmer, and consider to subscribe for a jolly time with me and Elden Ring content. While you wait for Shadow of the Erdtree, you might want to check out my analysis of Griffith and Miquella's character. Or stay tuned for my visualization of Elden Ring's faction with the Mogwin Dynasty being the first one, which will be out in a couple of days. Anyway, have a great day and see you next time. Ciao.